Good evening, everybody. So in the last few Sundays, the first and second readings have been taken from different parts of Scripture. But the gospel reading has had a seamless progression. We have been reading from Matthew's Sermon on the Mount. And we began about 2 Sundays back with Jesus going up the mountain. While the crowd stayed at the foot of the mountain, some came up to Jesus. And those who went up with him were called disciples, as opposed to the crowd that is at the foot of the mountain. To them, to these ones who dared to go up with Jesus, he preached the Beatitudes. And last Sunday, Jesus said to these very disciples, "You are the salt of the earth, and you are the light of the world." And that brings us to today. Today we hear about how we become the people in the Beatitudes. Today we hear about how we can be salt of the earth and light of the world. And Jesus does this by laying out an ethic for his disciples. Yes, there is a Christian ethic. Commandments, and how we understand the commandments have a big part to play in this. So in my first point, in my 3 points, I want to talk about the commandments. I want to talk about how Jesus relates to the commandments, then of course draw some practical implications from all of this. So first of all, commandments, more than just laws. For the people in the Old Testament, for that matter, even for people in the Old Testament, commandments were not mere laws. They represented something far deeper. The commandments revealed God. For example, today's first reading says, "Immense is the wisdom of the Lord. He is mighty in power and all-seeing." So the commandments really were an insight into God's wisdom, into God's power, into God's vision for the world. And this is key, huh? The commandments reveal God's vision for humanity. There's one more thing. The commandments were also an invitation to Israel to live life from God's perspective. We all have our perspectives. But it takes something to say, I'm going to live life from God's perspective. So here is the opening verse of today's readings. If you choose, you can keep the commandments, they will save you. If you trust in God, you too shall live. Now for us too, the commandments are more than laws. Perhaps this is why Jesus says to us in today's gospel reading, "Do not think I've come to abolish the law. I have come not to abolish, but to fulfill." Now, Jesus did not endorse legalism. Quite often in the Gospels, he actually speaks against it. In other words, I think what Jesus is saying is that the commandments themselves do not save us. The commandments themselves have no power to save. It is the God who gives the commandments who saves us. Hence, Jesus taught us to go beyond the commandments. And he himself tried to do that. I didn't come to abolish the law, but to fulfill it. He goes beyond the commandments. He taught his disciples to look at the vision the commandments were providing. It was a vision into God's wisdom, God's life, God's love, and God's care. In reality, the commandments are a participation in the life of God. Hence, they are holy. Now, Jesus' relation to the commandments. Until Jesus came, there was God, and there were the commandments. People were invited to study the commandments, love them, discover God's wisdom in them. But Jesus coming, there was a paradigm shift in three ways. First, Jesus is the personification of the law, of the commandments. In fact, Jesus is the giver of the commandments. Jesus is the fulfillment of the commandments. Really, Jesus is the commandments. Second, Jesus brought all the commandments under two: love God and love your neighbor. Love then becomes the fulfillment of the commandments. This is what Jesus is saying when he says, I did not come to abolish. No, I came to fulfill. And it's love that fulfills the commandments. The cross is the perfect symbol of the love of God and love of neighbor. Hence, the cross is the perfect fulfillment of the law and of the commandments. And the third paradigm shift is this: that we do not have to focus on the commandments themselves. And please don't be scandalized, I say that. That we do not have to focus on the commandments themselves. All we have to do is imitate Christ. To follow the commandments is to walk in the footsteps of Jesus. And to walk in the footsteps of Jesus is to fulfill all the commandments. There's the cross. It's very simple. So then let's reflect on the practical implications of all of this. In today's gospel reading, Jesus raises 4 areas for consideration by his disciples: anger, adultery, divorce, and oaths. Now, each of these areas have to do with commandments, right? Jesus tells his disciples how the Old Testament commanded us, and then I tell you so. There is a new way of fulfilling them. Sadly, anger, adultery, divorce, and questionable integrity are all real human experiences. We know, right? People around us who have experienced all of this, or we ourselves have. In today's gospel reading, when Jesus says, "You have heard that it was said of old," and then, "but I say to you," what is Jesus doing? Is he just replacing one commandment with the other? No, and this is the point of my homily. If you don't remember anything else, take this with you. When Jesus says, "You've heard that it was said of old, but I say to you," Jesus is helping us reimagine human living. He's really helping us to, this shift has to happen in the human brain and in the human heart. And Jesus is trying to reach his disciples to say, there is another way to live. Just for a moment, imagine a world without rage. How many times you experience that while driving? How many times do you yourself engage in rage because somebody's driving 5 miles slower right in front of you when you want to get there somewhere in time? Imagine a world without rage, violence, murder, infidelity. Imagine a world where everybody is patient and kind, gentle, generous, good. Imagine a day where no one dies from war, from violence, hate, and killings. Imagine, folks, that one day the headline in the newspaper was, "Today nobody died because someone killed another." One day, 1 hour, 1 minute. Imagine a world where infidelity does not destroy human relationships. Imagine a world where every person acts with integrity and truth and honesty. Jesus was crazy. I don't think the world could take him. He's helping us. It's not just about commandments and laws. Did I do this and did I? This is not. It's a whole new way of existence. And Jesus is helping his disciples to imagine this world. But this does not mean that Jesus is merely showing an imaginative world. This is not just Jesus taking us to Disney World. Jesus is saying that heaven-like life is a possibility in the here and now. In the Our Father, which is part of the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus taught us to pray, "Thy kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven." So listen, what's the practical implication from all of this, right? The crowd stayed at the bottom of the mountain, at the foot of the mountain, and there were disciples who went up. And I'm thinking that today we are the people who have gone up with Jesus. We are the disciples. We call ourselves Christians. We're a people of faith. What's the practical implication? Our world is not a perfect world. Our lives are not perfect lives. Yes, anger, adultery, divorce, questionable integrity, all that is part of this world and part of our lives. But in this imperfect world, Jesus invites us to live lives of love and faithfulness and peace and integrity. Listen, yes, the world is messed up, but can you and I commit ourselves to some things? That's the point of today's scripture. In this imperfect world, we are called to live out the Beatitudes. In this imperfect world, we are invited to imitate Jesus. Yeah, and you will look crazy like Jesus looked crazy. But in this imperfect world, we are called to imitate Jesus. In this imperfect world, we are called to be disciples. In this imperfect world, we are called to be salt of the earth and light of the world. When we do so, we fulfill all the commandments. So I've come a full circle. When we do so, we fulfill all the commandments. When we do so, God's heaven becomes a reality on earth. People of God said,